Hi, morning everybody. I'm Doug Pearson. I'm the CTO and one of the founders of FlowPlay. And I'm going to tell you our little story, which is a similar problem that Andre and Games faced about how to move a big project over from Flash to Haxe. But we made very different choices than they made. We took a different path. So we'll tell you why we chose the path we took and what the differences were. Okay, so problem for us, a similar issue. We had a successful game. So for us, that's Vegas World. It's a casino game. And if we didn't have a successful game, there would be no porting problem, right? We had nothing but failures. We would just go on and build brand new stuff on a brand new platform. There would have been no issue. But unfortunately, maybe fortunately, we had a successful game. So also it runs on a lot of platforms, right? So it's ActionScript code base, but we had one code base running across a bunch of devices. For us, that means the open web, inside Facebook app. We also do white label versions, so Microsoft has a version of our game which is called the Zone Online Casino. It looks like it's nothing to do with us, you don't see our name anywhere, but it's Microsoft's casino space, and we're actually the ones powering that and providing that. So we do white label versions. Then also for us mobile, which at the time was iPad and Android and Kindle, all off the same ActionScript code base. This one game made pretty much all of our revenue as a business, so making about $1 million a month for a company of the size of about 35 people at the time. We'll go back here about 2 years, where we're starting to think about what we had to do about this. So that was the large portion of our revenue, almost all of our revenue coming off this one game. And the whole thing, of course, I say it was in Flash. So what are we going to do about that? We knew there was a problem, right? In this case, we had developed a code base over about a period of 8 years. It's a huge game. It's actually a virtual world. It's not just a small set of games. And it's about 1.4 million lines of ActionScript that we managed to build over that time. And it was slow on these mobile devices. So it would run on the mobile devices, but it wasn't the performance we wanted. And we knew, of course, Flash was going away. At the time when we were talking about this, say about 2 years ago, we knew that it was coming up. One day the deadlines was coming, and now we've got official deadlines about when Flash is dying. So breaking that down a little more, what are our problems? So our art assets were vector-based art, right? So that's the way Flash supports vector-based art, which is great. It means it scales to any size. You can make wonderful posters like this, and it looks fantastic. But it requires the CPU to do all the rendering. So we needed to get into bitmap so we could get help with the GPU, right? Otherwise, we were going to perpetually be slow on mobile. So we knew we had to get over to bitmap art. We had this large and rather aging code base. So some technical debt, right? 8 years of work evolving a product, building out the product. We'd figured out over time what it really was, the product we wanted to build. But it meant we'd built things down some avenues, gone some courses we wouldn't have liked to do. So what to do about rewriting it? And we only have a relatively small development team to take on that problem. We also knew browsers could drop Flash at any time. That was a major concern, remains a bit of a concern, that one day we just simply would lose browser support for Flash, and if that happened, it would just kill our whole business, stone dead. So we knew that was a concern and had to get off it. So this similar problem that Andre mentioned, like we needed to replace the car while still driving down the freeway, right? It's not that we could just stop development on our mainline product. We needed to continue to add features. For us, it's a 2-week release schedule, always adding new functionality. They expect new features, new games. We need to make ongoing monetization improvements, find bug fixes, a constantly evolving product. And for our case, it means even doing new partnerships, maybe new devices, finding ways to grow our existing game base at the same time as we needed to replace it. So we couldn't just stop and say, okay, let's just go off and port it and leave that game alone. So we had to figure out some way to maintain them simultaneously. So what do we have to do? So for us, new platform. For us, we definitely wanted one code base. So we didn't want to have the problem of having 2 different code bases, so we wanted one code base for all devices, which for us, again, is web, iPad, and iPhone now, Android tablet, phones, Kindle. And we needed to support a large, complex code base, right? So with over 1 million lines of code, so type safety, strong type safety approaches was a major plus. We really wanted something that was very clear where the type system was going. So some of the reasons we chose Haxe, right? From here, it's sort of you're looking at it from the other end of the story. Everyone here is pretty much on the Haxe side, but why we chose Haxe, right? So we looked at some of the other options. HTML5, right? Certainly an option. Basically meaning JavaScript wrapped from mobile devices, right? These days it's all wrapping them into something like PhoneGap or Apps Accelerator, Cordova. They're all taking the same approach, basically wrapping the JavaScript with a browser. It's great, right, in some sense that it's a single code base naturally. Really is write once, run everywhere. But the obvious cons are that the performance is slowest on the devices where you care the most that you need highest performance, right? On the lower end mobile devices, you're running inside a browser with an interpreted language. It's just not the fastest option. So it seems like structural disadvantage. JavaScript doesn't have a strong type system, so that's a problem for us with a big code base. And Facebook very publicly went away from this approach, right? They had been doing the whole HTML5 mobile and moved away from that. So it could be that one day this is still the right answer, actually, right? I mean, this could be where we come back to. If you think about the way that apps on desktops used to be, right? We all used to be building individual apps, and then the web came along and people started to move everything to mobile, move everything into the browser. It could be that this still is the way that it goes on mobile one day, but not yet. So maybe another 5 years we might be thinking back to HTML5, but not for us. Another option in the game space, a big player, is Unity. We took a very serious look at Unity. It's great in terms of cross-compile to native. So Android and iOS, we get a cross-compile there. There is support for HTML5. A good, strong 3D engine, of course, that's great, and nice content creation tools. C#'s a strong programming language, no issues there, and a huge community, so a lot of support. Some of the cons for us, though, right, the web support definitely seems weak. The plugin model that they were using, not great. They're trying to get to this cross-compile model that goes through C++. They actually cross-compile from C# to C++, from C++ to ASM.js. That's very impressive, but seems like a very complicated thing to maintain. There was often, it seems like problems too with the versioning system in Unity, which is an interesting question as the Haxe world we live in, how that handles this too. But right, there's definitely a tie into a version of Unity. So for a long living game, that's a problem because you don't really want to have this model where you built with version 2 and then it goes to version 3 and you have to rewrite your game to a new system. We don't want to get into that space. Big issue for us, closed platform, right? So what if you run into a showstopper bug that no one else cares about, right? If you have this huge game, it really has a critical thing, no way around that. What if the platform died off? We wouldn't want that because in some ways Unity looks a little bit like Flash used to. And a big heavy sort of platform, like the platform's doing a lot more for you. Content creation, runtime, cross-compilation, the whole bit all in one tool chain. That seems like a lot of stuff. So from a software engineering standpoint, that seems like a tightly coupled system, which we know is not generally a good idea. We also looked at, there's other players in the space too, right? Pure mobile plays. Xamarin or React Native, you see people building those, but they tend to be just looking for native support, not so much on the web, and we needed web as well, and web is the big challenge for these cross-platform options these days. So Haxe, right, the way we see Haxe, why do we care about Haxe? Cross-compliant for all the targets that we needed about, certainly. Statically typed, that's great. The existence of this OpenFL library, which we used to help with porting of the Flash, and it says for us, open source is a major plus, so we really care that it's open source, so we can go and solve whatever problems even the platform itself doesn't care. Cons as we saw it, small community. This is a relatively small community. This is not as big as the Unity meetings when they get together, right? Could it handle a game of our size and complexity? We didn't know coming in. There weren't any obvious existing examples. The tool chain and documentation, certainly less polished than some of the other platforms. And practice then, did it work as well as the marketing blurb said it did? So these were our concerns going in. So what did we do? So we broke the problem into two. So we wanted to update our code base, so we went ahead and worked on that problem. So one was just rewrite our entire code base to use bitmapped art and work completely within ActionScript, right? So we didn't want to do a rewrite and switch languages and platforms. We wanted to make it just a rewrite and get over to bitmap. And then at the same time, we started a Haxe slots game from scratch. We wanted to build a proto-small Haxe game and see how did that work, right? How did that go? Prove that we could use the platform, prove the platform did everything that we thought it could do, get some knowledge about the way it would work. And it would use our existing back end, so we would learn everything we need to know before we went into the whole project. So port 1, say project 1, rewriting with bitmaps. So this involved some change in the UI. You can see this is the old version, this is the new version. It's very similar, but it's not exactly the same game. We cleaned up some of the stuff. We started thinking a little bit more about how we want to support mobile devices, more from the core. Entirely new game, new design, moved to more of a model view controller. We wanted to clean up some of that too. About 1 million lines of new code that got written for this, and it took us about 18 months working on this. Only 6 of that was with the full development team. We started with a small team, again, similar to what did. Small team and then expanded that out as need be. But it took us a long time just to do the straight rewrite. But this was all just in ActionScript. This is not the Haxe project yet. Okay, the second one was building a slots game in Haxe. So this for us was the first time we targeted handsets specifically. We'd done mobile, but mobile and tablets. So an all-new design, our first chance to get experience using the Haxe tool suite. Timeline for this took about 12 months with a pretty small team, about 4 people working on this. We did Android and iOS first, and then we did HTML5. We did a Windows 10 app store. Again, Microsoft was good enough to do a partnership with us to work on that. So that helped us prove out that we knew that the HTML5 target was going to work. That was a really key thing for us because we knew that's where we really wanted to end up. We were pretty confident the Android and iOS would be no problem. So where did we get to? So a year ago, we had the first project, the rewrite, complete and live, but we had polish work we wanted to do on it, but it was live. And this Haxe slots game was also complete and live. It demonstrated to us that Haxe was a viable project. So we knew at this point that we could hit Flash targets, Android, iOS, HTML5, all from one code base. We had run into the issue that native extensions are a challenge. That is something that we've seen and continues to be a bit of an issue. And the IDE support is still not ideal. So there's definitely some work to be done there. So we knew there were some problems and some issues that we wanted to work on the plugin. And of course, along the way, May 2016, the big drop came down that Chrome announced that they were going to start disabling Flash by default. And so we needed to get on and get moving. We knew this was coming one day, but at the time, we didn't know if it was going to be 5 years from now or if it was going to be this year. And sure enough, it started to show up. So we were glad we were already working on this. So we started about a year ago on the Haxe port. So this was just a direct port of the rewritten code base. So this was not making any changes, right? So we already had a cleaned up code base, an ActionScript code base using bitmap art. So no UI changes, no art changes, just get the game over. And the goal here was to launch in Flash. So that was actually one of the questions before. It's like we didn't want to target initially. So the plan was to go to Haxe and then launch Haxe generating Swifts, right? So compiled ActionScript code as the initial target because we knew that in theory, this should be the exact same binaries that the end user would be experiencing. So we could get ourselves onto a different source code base and then move with the issue of getting over to HTML5. So that's to say, this is just moving exact same game, Vegas World across to Vegas World, looks identical, plays identical, no changes whatsoever. That was our goal and still is our goal. So some major challenges we had to face, right? So at this point, we were supporting 3, and we still are to some extent, live large code bases all at once. So we had an old ActionScript game. We hadn't actually moved all of our users across yet. We had an old version of the game, a newly rewritten version, and we were migrating players steadily. We didn't want to move them all just overnight because we knew we'd lose some revenue. We didn't want that. And this new ported Haxe game. So that's definitely been a challenge. That's where maybe the other approach of doing the continuous compilation would have been better. Anyway, still continuously adding features to the live games. So we're rebuilding the car as we're driving down the freeway, or down the Autobahn here. So anything we added to the old games need to be added to the new games and Haxe games. So not a fun state for the development team for a while. It's a huge complex game, right? Over 1 million lines of code to get ported over to Haxe. 50-odd slot machines, 12 table games, 50,000 in-games items that you can buy, avatars, social features. It's a complete world, right? It's not just actually a bunch of games. It's a world you can inhabit. You can walk around, have parties, socialize with players, tons of stuff. And a real challenge for this is we're working on a game that is a social game. And social games are a little harder because the players can actually unite against you. And we've had that in the past. We've had revolts in-game where they banded up against us and forced us to change the pricing of the product because they could organize boycotts and they could actually drive revenue to the floor. So it's been an interesting experience. And so that makes a new challenge. When you're bringing out new features, you have to really, you can't just say, look, this is just the way the world is, because they can organize together and say, no, we don't want it. We're not going to go to your new game. We don't care, because we're all going to organize ourselves and not do that. So we have to be, it's a conversation with our player base rather than just us acting like God and saying, here's what it's going to be. Some things that we think are good decisions. So certainly the initial design, the way that we built our code base was very abstracted. So all the fundamental operations, loading images, drawing stuff, playing animations, it's all abstracted away, right? So our code base basically doesn't care what the underlying framework is doing. So we just say, hey, go get me this bitmap. And it gets back a bitmap. So that meant there wasn't like 50 different places we'd have to solve issues as we moved on to the Haxe code base. If we weren't getting an image back, we weren't getting an image back everywhere. And then when we fixed that, it was going back everywhere. So good modular design certainly helped. The games themselves are very modularly built, so we have all these different separate games like Blackjack inside a virtual world. Those are all modular, and that seemed to work out well for us. We directly invested ourselves right in the Haxe platform, so we actually hired Joshua Granick, who's the lead developer on OpenFL, so he now works at our offices. And we also contracted with Eric Bishon, who's been doing work on the IntelliJ plugin. So the way we've worked with these guys is we're paying their salaries now, at least partially for Eric and fully for Joshua. The work they do isn't proprietary. The work they do is all still contributed back to the community. It's just that we get to say some of the things about like, okay, how about you work on this issue ahead of that issue, right? Because we want this thing done sooner rather than later. But it's not that we're keeping that proprietary to ourselves. We are just contributing it all straight back into the platform. But we knew we wanted to make sure we knew that the right things were getting worked on for certainly for OpenFL. Some of the things we think of as being good decisions, so we went the other way. We didn't use automated tools hardly at all. We started using the ES2 Haxe conversion tool and decided that was a bad idea. So the problems, we didn't want to end up with runtime errors, right? We didn't want to have code that would compile that was actually wrong. So we didn't want it to be converted and be incorrect. So as I say, it's a little different choice than InnoTuck. So we went to the opposite extreme. We went with just a very simple string replacement tool, right? So we just do type replacements, things that were clearly correct. So we could do changes that we knew were correct. Everything else we wanted to end up with compilation error, so the developer would go in and rewrite the correct code. Now we had no plans to maintain this as an ongoing porting process. So we did talk about that early on, but we decided this was the way we wanted to go, and we think that was the right choice for us. Definitely another important decision, which I think was a very good decision looking back on it, is that we did the rewrite separate from the port, right? It'd be very tempting as a software company to do a rewrite and do a port at the same time, right? Change the game at the same time as moving across. In some ways it might seem like it's simpler, but I think that was definitely a bad idea. So we rewrote in a language and using tools that we knew, got to a code base that was completely clean and had bitmap-based art, whilst we were learning a new platform, and then we ported it without making any changes. So that, I think, was definitely the right model. Some other things. The choice to go open source definitely helped us, and definitely think of that as being one of the right decisions looking back. We had some problems and bugs in the rendering engine that we could go in and fix back in the earlier versions of OpenFL. We ran into a specific problem with IPv6 support that we could just go in and change some of the socket code. So getting into any of those pieces, and we started to look at the modular HTML5, although I see there's talk on that, so maybe there's platform support coming for that. So anything we need out of the platform, we're not afraid that we can just go in and make those changes ourselves. You know, we have a team of talented engineers. We can solve problems we need to solve. Some conclusions. So for us, Haxe was the right choice because it worked. I mean, we don't have this live today. If you go to vegasworld.com today, you're still playing the ActionScript version, but it could be as soon as 10 days from now, we may be going live with the Haxe version. And when we flip over, we hope that no one will be able to tell that we're making the flip, right? We're literally going to have a flag that we're going to flip back and forth. There'll be a one-line code change on our hosting page to say load the Haxe version, load the ActionScript version, and players should be unable to tell the difference. If they can spot a difference, we haven't done our job right, but we think that's the case. So we think that'll come out, say it could be 10 days. QA is looking at it now, could be 2 more weeks. So our plan is to go out Flash, Android, and iOS initially, and then we're going to get HTML5 support coming, but not right away. So we have an HTML5 version that's running. We want to spend some time making sure we get the proper performance. It feels good to be on a cross-platform solution because maybe WebAssembly will become the new dominant platform. Maybe we want to do a desktop app and release on Steam. All of that seems like it's much more open to us now and pretty easy with single code base. So cross-compiling in general feels like a strong place to be. Performance looks really good for us. We're not tied to one platform in the way that we used to be. So getting off the ActionScript code base, getting the Haxe code base feels like a good thing. And so the fact that it's open source feels right too. It's nice that the Haxe toolset feels a lot lighter than the full platform. Really appreciate Nicholas' comments about keeping the code compilation speed up. Like, it really matters that this is a small, lightweight toolkit. It's not trying to do everything for every problem. You want to have a broken out problem, less in the platform, more in the libraries. So we have libraries that we're using, right? We're using Starling. We can use Away 3D if we want. These are all just Flash libraries that exist. Pretty easy to port them across and extend them as we want. So it's nice to put that logic into the library rather than sort of building it right into the platform. And historically, this seems to have done better for platforms. Think about Java against Flash, right? Java is a lighter weight platform. It only really supports a language with a bunch of libraries. Flash is a complete ecosystem, and of course, Flash has died out. Whilst Java continues strong. So the bottom line for us, companies still in business, right? There was a real risk when we started this that it might not be. Revenues are up 50% from where we started, so that's really good too. We managed to maintain this thing of updating the game as we've gone at the same time as not just as building the brand new features. So now we think we can finally get back to building new stuff. Now that we're going to get back to just having a single code base to maintain rather than having to maintain 3 code bases, life will get a lot easier. So questions. And for us, if you know the Haxe compiler internals, we think we may yet need to get some help there, so we'll see. If you have a Haxe game available for licensing, we should talk, because we might want to start licensing a few games and put in some other products. Anyway, other than that, any questions? Yes?
What difficulties did you encounter in the porting process?
It basically wasn't that bad. The porting, once we got to a nice cleaned up code base, the porting didn't turn out to be that hard. I mean, there were certainly things we could not automatically port, but there wasn't any one section where we ran into and said, look, this is really hard to figure out. There's some issues around the type system, some things that we had done, as already been mentioned, there's some fluidity in the types in ActionScript that's not there in Haxe, so you have to get a little tighter. But we see that as basically being steps to improving the code base. I mean, it's not a bad thing, right? The type system's a little tighter in Haxe. We like strong type systems, so that's that's been a way to sort of improve the code and get rid of some of the fluffiness that was already there in ActionScript. And no huge problems. I mean, basically things went very smoothly. It just took a while because it was a big project. It took us about 9 months to do the porting itself, just from start to finish, like straight up porting. Although most of that was spent with, again, a small team before we expanded it out to a bigger team. Yeah?
You said you're using the simple string replace tool to port like ActionScript effects. How
Yep.
do you manage that? How you ensure that the strict typing? How you, for instance, port arrays or dictionaries?
Well, we didn't do any of that stuff. So that's what we didn't do, right? So we instead we tried to wrap all that code into using a parent class and then write our own class to handle that, rather than have it be that we mapped over arrays and dictionaries itself. So we just stayed out of that space. So it meant more manual porting had to get done. But most of that was pretty straightforward porting work when you came to it. What I say, our decision was a little different. Like we said, look, we want to make sure that a human looks at every piece of code that might go wrong. We didn't want it to be that we use an automated tool that would mostly be correct but might be wrong sometimes and might lead to really hard to find runtime bugs, right? We knew that we might have bugs that might take us a month to figure out because it might be really subtle and only in a very complicated case cause us a problem, and we didn't want to face those. We knew that a compile time error for most developers is simple. You just look at the code and you rewrite it, and once you've rewritten a bunch of code, you can start getting really fast at that, right? So people were able to take entire modules, entire games, and port the entire game over. Maybe it would take them a week of development time, right? Not a lot of time, really, to move a complete game across. And that would be one piece of our matters. So it just didn't turn out to be that hard of a problem to rewrite it by hand.
So there were not too many places to manually
No, I mean, there was still a fair amount, but it was all pretty straightforward rote work. I mean, it's so just not that hard work. As opposed to what we didn't want was to create complicated problems, right? It's like, what's a hard problem for a developer, right? Fixing a compilation error. Anyone who's a developer in this room can fix a compilation error, and usually you can fix it in like 5 seconds, right? It doesn't take you don't have to think, you just look at the code, you rewrite it. But if you have a subtle runtime error where maybe you've changed the loop and now the root bound is off, how long will it take you to figure out that the loop is actually got a wrong bound to it when it maybe works correct 95% of the time, and then in one case, you call it with a different limit and now it actually fails incorrectly? Like, what is it that's going wrong in this complicated game, right? We just didn't want those kind of errors. So that's why we chose to say, look, just only make the changes we know are for sure correct, and everything else we'll do by hand, and it just didn't take us that long. Once we practiced. Took a while to learn. Yes?
How do you feel about the IDE support? You got Eric to help you with the IntelliJ?
Yeah.
Like if we say that Java is like the golden standard, where are we?
It's the IntelliJ is still, yeah, I mean, we like IntelliJ as a browser, as a IDE. It's a real question mark. I think the IDE support is still an unanswered question for us. I mean, we are working on it. There's still a lot of issues with the IDE. It's very interesting to see the Visual Studio options here, right? So maybe we will want to switch over to that at some point. We were just talking about that, Craig and I. We were just discussing, like, should we be looking more serious? I think you're certainly taking the right path with like actual compiler support. So that seems like it's the correct model for an IDE. So eventually it seems like that IDE will be better than the IntelliJ approach. So that might be where we end up to, and maybe we'll jump on board and switch ships. But I'm not sure we're ready to switch ships yet. I have to go back and ask the team, right? What things are missing today, right? Maybe we'll switch over in a year's time. Maybe we don't switch over today, but but there's definitely, it's not a strength, right? It's like, it's okay, but there's definitely some problems still in the IDEs. Yes?
How do you handle like moving from vector to binary? Because it seems like vector is really awesome for different platforms. Like you don't have to worry about different sizes. Like, are you having to manually make the different sizes, or do you have a build system?
We have a build system that generates a different resolution. So that's a great question, right? How do you handle the fact that we no longer can just scale the assets and they don't just render at the right resolution? So we do it as a compile step. We generate assets at many different resolutions, and then we pick the one that we think is the appropriate closest one. We might have to stretch it a little bit, but it's going to be close to being rendered at the correct size. So that's all happening. We build our own tools to do that. So we just generate them. And some of those are working now with just bitmap assets as the originator, and some of them are working with Swifts. So it still depends on what we want to have. So we're still creating some of our assets as Swifts, and some of our artists are still used to using that as a creation pipeline, so we're still doing that, we still support that, but none of it's being rendered at runtime. So by runtime, we're loading a bitmap at the correct size at runtime. But it's a thorny problem, frankly.
I didn't see that Haxe has some support for vector, right?
Yes, you can. I mean, and it works reasonably well, but it seems like the wrong solution. I mean, you're putting a lot of work into the runtime engine. You can do that, but I mean, you're asking a lot to render it at runtime, and then you have to create the bitmap. You're going to have to create a bitmap then on the fly, and it can be done. But getting animation working correctly and that stuff, it just feels like it's not really the place to be doing that is at runtime. You'd rather do it at compile time if you can. So we've been moving to that, and now we've moved our animations over to Dragon Bones. We use Dragon Bones for animations rather than using animation within a Swift. So it's a choice, but it was a painful choice. Getting off that and getting onto bitmaps was not a small project. That was the bigger part of our work.
A large part of your presentation went through technologies that you ruled out.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you explored creating hacks. So this game is a modular game. There are games that are loaded into it.
Sure.
I wonder if you explored creating hacks games that were loaded into the larger game, and what you might have listed as a con for that.
As a con for that? Oh, interesting. So I don't know. We are certainly starting to think about that. I mean, these games are all internally built. So we have been thinking about, could we support, as I mentioned, we might be open to including licensed games in some form, but we haven't worked out the technical issues for that. It's a very easy thing. We've done that in the past for ActionScript. It's very easy because the browser, the way we've done it in the past is the browser actually provides us the environment. We just placed a div layer of a game over the top of our game, so we'd actually have two games running with one in front of the other, and that way there's no interaction between them, and they just post messages through JavaScript to each other. So that works really well for us. I think there would be much bigger challenges to do that inside Haxe. So we don't know. We're open to working on that problem, but I think it is going to be a thornier issue. Okay, we it? I think that's it. All right, thanks very much.